My name's Brad Chappell. Started crappie fishing probably about 20 years ago. I got a little bass tracker and decided I'm gonna learn how to crappie fish. So what do? First thing I did was read some books, read some magazines, and kind of developed what I wanted my style, I guess you would say. So I started pulling crankbaits, and even at that time, nobody even was pulling crankbaits. Kent Driscoll with the B&M was the only guy I ever heard of doing it. And that's, like I said, that's 15, 20 years ago. Got out there and threw some crankbaits out and started dragging them behind me, started catching a few fish. Got into fishing some tournaments. Magnolia Crappie Club, which is one of the oldest crappie clubs in the United States. Started fishing it, first tournament, wound up coming in 4th place. Got hooked. And then I fished every tournament around for years. At one time I held the largest 7 fish, I call it the pre-live scope record on Grenada. I weighed in 19.5 pounds with 7 fish on Grenada, and that was spider rigging, and it was a magical day. But I held that record for 20 something years. That still holds today before live scope. Now I got beat last year with a guy named Terry Stewart with live scope. Now he beat me, but nobody else did before that, so I hold that. And then a couple years ago, we started a thing called the Crappie Connection. And my son right here, you can kind of see him with the camera in his hand. He went to Southern Miss and got his engineering degree in sound audio and all that good stuff. And I'm clueless when it comes to technology as far as this goes. But we were sitting around and was talking about podcasts. What do we like to do when we're traveling is listen to the radio. Well, I like talking about crappie fishing. I like hearing about people talk about crappie fishing, so we started it. Has anybody else listened yet? I'd say about half you guys. What it is anywhere from Wade to Caps and Coleman, Todd Huckabee, a couple guys even in the room right now has been on it. And all we discuss is different techniques, different news, things that's happening in the crappie fishing world. And it's just a really fun thing that we did to give back to you guys, to teach people how to become better crappie fishermen, to teach them about the history of the sport. We discuss everything. So if you haven't listened to us yet, I hope you do. We can be found on iHeartRadio, Spotify, YouTube, you name it. Anything you listen to podcasts, we're on there. But it's a fun thing that we're doing. I think we've recorded 3 or 4 episodes while we're here so far, and we'll do some more as we go this weekend. But what I'm here for now is what we call long line trolling, and I've been doing it probably about 12, 14, 15 years. And I started doing it whenever I was fishing tournaments with Magnolia Crappie Club. Some guys from the East Coast come over, and be honest, they whipped our tail because that's all we used to do is spider rig. And these guys come in and they dominated a whole crappie season by pulling jigs. So I'm like, man, that looked really fun. I like pulling crankbaits already, so I said, I'm gonna figure this stuff out. So I spent one whole summer, just like you would any other technique, and kind of come up with my own style. So through the years, I've kind of developed what we're gonna discuss today, even like charts. But what long line trolling is, I know everybody looked at, well, look, these crazy poles I just brought in, different sizes and all that kind of stuff. But all it is taking jigs and throwing them out the back of the boat. Now, I can go through and make it as complex as I want it to, or I can make it as simple as I want to. There's not a single person in this room that cannot go out and long line troll with me and catch fish. The boat and the speed of the boat and different factors like that is what's going to, cause the reaction to actually catch fish. But you can take from the very young youth to the elderly. So anybody can go crappie fishing and long line troll and catch fish. So that's one of the big advantages of it, in my opinion, is you don't have to have this high intensity skill set like you do in live scope. Live scope is a fun way to crappie fish, but it takes a lot of practice really to compete. Now this technique doesn't take a whole lot of finesse as far as live scoping. And what it is you know, I use 4 different size jig heads. And I'm gonna just kind of lay them out here, and I'm gonna go through this chart. But I'm gonna start out with a 32nd ounce jig head. Now, I always use bladed jig heads, so if this chart is based on bladed jig heads. I like big blades, I like big hooks. You could make a rap song out of that, I guess, but this is what I use day in and day out. This is a little chart that I came up with. Now, there's a little differences when you come to long lining. A different blade, style blade from a willow leaf to a Carolina blade is going to run differences. This chart is based on a willow leaf blade and, you know, this style jig head. And my #1 bait that I use, and literally have caught thousands of fish, is off the Bobby Garland stroller. This is my favorite bait. I've been with Bobby Garland baits for 10 plus years, come up with a bunch of colors, and actually this is a custom color that I had them pour for me probably about 5 years ago after I got through fishing Darbone in Louisiana. Purple Passion. Familiar with it?
Yes, sir. That's a bestseller.
Really?
Yeah.
I'll do that little pat. But this color right here, I come back to Bobby Garland and I said, look, you've got to pour this color for me. And they did. And first thing I did when I went to that tournament down there with Darbone, and it was Crappie Masters, everybody says, well, you're not going to catch fish here doing this. I actually like that. So that tells me nobody else is doing it. So these fish ain't used to do it. And so I went there, threw out my jigs, and started really catching a lot of fish. But that color, that tournament was June Bug Chartreuse was actually one of my favorite colors. Well, it's right here in my hand. June Bug Chartreuse down there is actually a really good color too. But went down there, lost a ton of jigs and stump fields, but I caught a ton of fish. And we had a really good tournament at the end. Got a check and come home with a check. But to kind of go back to the basics on long lining is, I'm throwing the jigs out the back of the boat. 95% of the time, I'm gonna start out with double jigs. And I'm gonna show you how to tie them as well. But if the fish are real shallow in the water column, as you can see in this chart, and in the springtime, everybody knows they're gonna go to the shallow flats and the shallow stump flats. Whenever crappie are spawning, your big females, they're gonna sit outside and kind of rest between their spawning activities. So they're gonna run in there and lay some eggs, but they're gonna come back to open water and suspend. So that's me as past tournament fishing a lot. I wanted to target the biggest fish, so I would long line even during the heart of the spawn. But 3 or 4 foot deep is a good spawning depth to pull. Even in the wintertime right now, these fish are only suspend 3 or 4 foot deep. So if I'm targeting and I see on my side image fish sitting really high in the water column, and I know that my bait needs to be at their height or above them, you know, I'm gonna throw out 2 32nd ounce jig heads and go 1.2, and my baits are gonna be going roughly 3 to 4 foot deep. And then I just work myself down all the way to, you know, the dead of the winter time right now, say they're 15 foot deep, I'm gonna pull double quarters, or in the heat of the summer at Sardis is a really lake that they like getting deep in the summertime. But that chart's just one that I've come up with years ago, and it's actually published in Fisherman magazine, and it took a lot of time to come up with that. And I didn't ever let that secret out until Live Scope kind of ruined my tournament game. But one of the other things that I do when a lot of people don't do when they long line troll is, as I've got these baits out the back of the boat and I'm pulling them, all right, I've got my depth range that these fish are at, I'm gonna twist a boat. And what I mean by twist a boat is, as I'm going straight, I'm gonna kick it to the left a little bit, and it's gonna cause those baits on the right side to go faster and the ones on the left to go slower. As I'm moving the boat just a hair left and right, my baits are speeding up and slowing down, speeding up, slowing down. And we've seen this well through the Live Scope deal is fish react a lot of times from different speeds, from either speeding up or slowing down. that used to make me a lot of money in tournaments as far as twisting a boat. I know you're a long line. Have you ever tried that?
Zigzag a lot.
Yep. That's a really good key to long line, and it's actually just barely twisting a boat. And you're just making those baits swing, go faster and slower back and forth. But I start out with 18-foot poles, and they're going to be the first pole that I've got staged in front of the boat. As you can imagine, this right now I would be facing my right side of the boat. I would have the 18, the 15, the 12, and then a 9-foot. I want 3-foot separation in between my poles. That way I have a water coverage, an even coverage, but also don't get as many tangles. So if you only have like 1.5 feet or 2 foot, you're gonna have more tangles. People always want to know, do you have a lot of tangles? Yes. You fished with me before, haven't you?
Yeah.
How long ago?
2 years.
I was thinking so. Good to see you. And we long line too, I bet. Yeah, I figured so.
You catch anything?
Yeah. So it does work. I got a witness here. But you know, you want line separation in between your baits and your poles. I like using high vis line. Another thing that I really like doing is going from a clear line to a high vis line. And the reason behind it is when I get a tangle, I'm untangling a clear line versus a high vis line. That's just something that I've done, especially fishing tournaments. If I wanted to get them untangled really quick and I had 2 different color lines, it's a whole lot easier getting 2 different color lines untangled compared to the same color. So that's one thing that I do a lot different than most people. You find this little thing and I'm going to show you how to actually tie them up. If I didn't drop it a while ago. Oh, here it is. I use the overhand loop knot. And this knot is by far the simplest knot you'll ever tie in your life. And I really like using this knot no matter what technique that I'm doing. There's some jig heads right here. If I'm dipping timber or anything else, this is the knot that I use. And it's, like I said, it's extremely simple to do. I just got some really cheap line, but hopefully you can get the understanding on how to tie it. I'm gonna take my first jig and just put it on the line itself and drop it. I'm gonna take and this is gonna be my bottom jig that I'm gonna tie right now. All right, I just ran it through the line itself and brought it up about 6 or 7 inches. And now I'm pinching the line together. I'm gonna form a loop with my fingers, 2 fingers, and I've got a loop at this point. And I'm gonna run it through there 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Now I've still got both the lines pinched with my left. And I don't want this loop to be extremely big. I only want it to be about 1 inch. So I'm gonna hold the right side next to the jig and pull it close. Right there's my bottom jig, and then I would just, it's not recommended to use your teeth, but that's how I do it still. That's my bottom jig, and that's about 1 inch loop knot from my bottom. Now I've got my second jig. And how do I decide and how far apart do I tie them? And I've always done the same thing. I try to be consistent with this. I'm gonna tie it about my belt loop. Real scientific way here to do it. It's about my belt length. I'm gonna form another loop. I had to slow my fingers down. Form another loop. I'm running through there 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Now this time I'm gonna pull actually away from the jig head itself. I want this loop knot to be about 5 inches long. And there it is. All right, I'm gonna take We'll do purple passion, so we know that works in Louisiana. Then I'm gonna actually put them on the hook. On the Bobby Garland strollers, they've got a flat back on the top side of the jig head itself, on the jig body. And they've got a lot of grease. But that's the flat portion of this jig body. And I want it to be the top portion of it. Now, I've seen people do it different ways. This is the way that the bait was really designed to use, but it'd probably work other ways as well. But now these are two, I believe they're 1/8. Well, these are quarters. All right, these are 2 quarters. So I know right now if I was targeting fish that were at 17 foot deep, I could be pulling them at 1 mile an hour with 2 quarters. I'm gonna put them out between 16 and 18 foot deep. How far do I throw the pole out? The actual jigs out behind the boat. And I had the question earlier, do I use line counter reels? I do not. And the reason behind it, and this is all my magical thinking anyway, as you throw them out, the 3 main factors that control the depth is the speed of the boat, just as we see in this chart, the size of the line that I'm using, and the size of these jig heads. That's the 3 main factors that control how deep these jigs are being trolled behind the boat. As you throw out this jig combination, it's going to level out. This line's going to kind of level out as it's being thrown back there. So, you know, yeah, I guess if you throw out 600 feet, it's going to go deeper. But, you know, every time I get up and I throw a pole out, I've got a general idea how far it's going to cast and land, just because it has the same weight on every pole, and it's just repetition. You know, more you throw at the same time, it's going to land pretty much the same depth out. And that's going to be about 70, 80 feet. There's some factors that, you know, if you want to go extremely deep, yeah, you're going to let out a whole lot more line. But this chart is based on just a good old cast. It ain't based on 55 foot. I really think between 40 to about 80 feet, these jigs are going to be trolled about the same depth. And as we've seen even with live scope, fish are just not at one consistent depth all day long. Or you might have 6 fish together and one's going to be at 14 foot deep, one's going to be at 17. So being that precise is probably not all that important. Anybody got any questions so far? This is an open forum, so if you got a question about this, you know, shoot.
You have a problem with the bottom tangling up like it?
No, I do not.
The top jig won't twist around.
No, that's why, you know, you put them that far apart. I think that if you put them closer together, they will go a little deeper. I always tie them about 3 foot apart, and that's just good old belt length for me. And you know, if I'm searching for a color, if I'm really wanting to fine tune what color the fish are biting, you know, I do go by the old theory: bright days, bright colors; dark days, dark colors. But I don't live and die by that same phenomenon, whatever. I'm gonna start out that way. And a lot of days, if I'm totally new to a lake, now I've got an idea fishing a lot the same lakes over and over what colors are gonna bite. But I will put on 16 different colors if I got to. And say if I get a bite on one that has, say this color combination right here, which is June bug, which is kind of like a chartreuse tail and a purplish green body. If I catch one off of this bait, it tells me at that point that I'm gonna see as well if it's, did they bite the chartreuse or did they bite the purple? So you can keep fine tuning things to really get what these fish want. So at that point, if I caught one off June bug, I'm gonna put on the solid chartreuse, and I'm gonna probably put on, like I said, the purple passion. And if I don't catch anything off either one of them, well, they like the combination together. And that's one reason these bait companies have so many different colors, so you can fine tune and really get on a hardcore pattern. And in any kind of crappie fishing, you guys know it's all about pieces to a puzzle. And that's one thing that I really love about crappie fishing is I feel like it's a puzzle. Every day when I'm getting on the water, I've got a puzzle before me that's laid out. And I've got to put the little pieces together, whether it's, you know, twisting the boat. And some days I don't want no twist. Some days I just want that boat to go straight. And they don't want a lot of action in the jigs being trolled. But some days I want that erratic movement. And some days they want an orange head or a white head. But it's all these different pieces that I try to put together. And there's nothing more fulfilling to me besides catching fish, but to really having the feeling that I've got them patterned. And as we talk about different techniques, it's all about patterns. It's all about recognizing what the fish want at that given time, that day, this body of water. One thing that's always real intriguing to me is I can go to one lake and 10 miles down the road another lake and they're not biting at all. Well, probably I didn't do my job too well and didn't just figure them out. But I think a lot of guys, when I started crappie fishing, you know, I'd show up to a lake and you see guys loading up the boat and first thing I would be is, hey, they biting today? And I learned through the years that if they're not biting, somebody's going to tell you they're not biting. Now, they're not going to always tell you they loaded the boat either, but if a horrible bite's there, they're going to say, well, they're not biting here good. But the first thing I always asked them was, what color jigs were you using? Usually everybody said black and chartreuse. I mean, that was like the #1 color, and I think it still is. And at that point, I just knew that I wasn't going to use black and chartreuse. I was going to start out with white or, you know, something totally opposite of what they didn't catch them on. So kind of use that, you know, mentality that to get all these pieces that's out there and combine it to come up with patterns on these fish. Who else is long lined? I know.
You ever long line and pull cranks at the same time?
No. That scares me. that scares me. And the reason why it scares me is tangles. I don't like starting out, you know, even with different setups. And the reason behind it, if I'm pulling 2/16 and I'm pulling 2/8, and if I turn my boat to go back into another area, those 16ths that are being pulled behind the boat track different. They might take them longer to make a sweep around, and usually that's how you get tangles. So there's another tip. Do not use different size jig heads and do turns. Now if you just plan on going straight forever, you know, it's fine. I always try to look for, you know, the active area of a lake. And I go through how I look at side imaging and down imaging compared to other people. You know, everybody says, well, just look for shad. Well, yeah, you look for shad. But then I look at the shad balls on the screen. And what I mean by shad balls on the screen, I'm sure everybody has the Discovery Channel and watch, you know, different underwater shows of fish behavior. And if you've noticed through the years, and you watch these shows that, say a shark or a tuna or whatever is eating these little bait fish, all the bait fish are clumped together really tight. They're scared. They're grouping together for protection. So if I'm side scanning and I just see shad scattered all over my unit, what does that tell me? They're not scared of nothing. There's nothing there scaring them. There's nothing there eating on them. So that's the area to me that, well, there's a lot of shad here, but nothing's active. So if I go to an area and I see tight balls of shad on your side image and your down image, or even your live scope, that tells me that's an area that the shad are being preyed upon. That's an active area of the lake. Now, if you take anything else outside this seminar, that's what I would take. A lot of people ask you, well, how do you go to a new lake and find a place to tournament fish? Or a place to just catch fish? And that's one of the things I like doing is side scanning and then looking for tight balls of shad. Because if I go to an area and they're all just scattered about, heck, they're kind of like us in here. We're not scared at this point. We're all grouped together, you know, just spread out. If something bad happened, we'd all be huddled together at this point, right? Shad are the same way. Any animal's pretty much the same way. You see herds of elk, you know, if they're all scattered about, you know, not scared, they're just scattered everywhere. Well, all of a sudden they get ready to run somewhere, they get together and run. Shad is the same way when you're looking for areas to fish. So that's a little tidbit. Got any other questions about longline?
What temperature of water do you start doing that?
I long line all the way to about 40 degrees. So if it's 45 degrees, I'm throwing out long lines. One of the advantages of long lining compared to spider rigging, in my opinion, is I'm covering a large area of water during the day. I'm getting to learn that lake faster than somebody that's spider rigging moving at 0.4. I'm covering really the 3 times the amount of water column that they're covering compared to spider riggers. And then, you know, what do you do if you catch 2 fish, and I know the fish are in this area? One, I'm gonna look for the same areas that's similar on the lake, and then I'm gonna come back through there. So I'm gonna say, all right, I just caught 6 fish in 14 foot of water. I'm pulling 2/8 at 1.2. You know, I know the fish are pretty much right off the bottom, so I'm looking for other areas in the lake that's real similar. And, you know, I'm gonna go back to that side scanning tip is, all right, I see the shad balled up tight in that area, just like the place I just left, so now I've got 2 areas of fish. There's a gentleman that used to fish a lot of crappie club tournaments with us, and named Rabbit Rogers, and phenomenal fisherman. And he told me years ago, he's like, you never leave biting fish. So even with long lining, as I get through an area, I'm gonna turn that sucker around and go right back through there again. And I'm gonna keep hammering them until I catch them, or I'm not. This technique, I don't beg fish to bite. This technique is kind of like, I seen a lab in here, I believe. He's bred to go retrieve something. When a duck falls out of the sky, his instinct is to chase it and go grab it and bring it back to you. These fish's instinct, whenever they're feeding, is to attack. And that's what they're doing. They're not saying, well, you know, yeah, they're actively feeding. So you're gonna pick off the active fish in the lake. Another thing on a down image, what it shows me, whenever I see fish in a water column, and I really noticed this years ago when going to Bass Pro Shops, and I get ready to do a seminar, all the hungry fish, first thing they did is come up to the top of the water and look. As crappie, as I'm looking on a down image shot, I'm looking for the highest suspended crappie in the water column. That tells me that's the highest active fish. Usually the fish that are on the bottom are just sitting there chilling out. Now all of them down there, you know, that's where you got to fish, of course. But as I'm down imaging and I'm going around to different parts of the lake, and I'm noticing, well, a lot of fish are sitting at 6 foot deep. That tells me that's the active fish in that water column. So that's another little maybe tidbit you can get through here. And I'm going to touch on another technique that's real similar that kind of goes along. It's fishing out of the back side of the boat now, or the side of your boat. You can fish from the side or the back. I fish out of the back of my boat. But it's pulling crankbaits. This is the bait that I started out fishing with years ago, and everything, somebody asked me when they get in the boat and they've never pulled crankbaits before, is crappie actually eat something that big? And you'll be amazed how many 6-inch crappie hit crankbaits. This is a really good summertime technique. There's guys that do it in the wintertime as well and catch fish, but it really, really shines in the summertime, and you've got that water really hot, especially in South Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, and all over the place. That water gets hot and these fish, it becomes a thermocline in the water. Have you ever seen that on the fish finders? It's just like a dead area of the water. That everything below it's no oxygen, and the fish have to suspend up to breathe. But this technique is pulling crankbaits. One thing that I use that's a little bit different than some guys, I use braided fishing line. And there's a couple factors why I use braid compared to mono. One of the reasons I like using braid is, as we see on this package, this dude's $6 a piece. And I've got 8 of them out the back of my boat at a time. That's 50 bucks I'm putting on the line, I guess you would say, at every given moment. And I don't like losing crankbaits. So I use braided fishing line. Another reason I like using braid is that compared to mono on a pole, it's going to vibrate like crazy. It's going to show if you snag a leaf, that pole's going to actually sit still at that point. So I can tell that my crankbaits are running really good if that pole's back there jiggling non-stop. And that's because of braided fishing line compared to mono. Another thing that I like braid over mono is that it dives deeper. Say if, and on a precision trolling app, you can pull it up and it's going to tell you exactly how deep a crankbait's going to go as you're being trolled. And you know, you might say to get to 16 foot, which that's really deep for a crankbait, you might have to put out 180 feet. That's a lot of line to pull in. Well, with braid, it's probably going to take out around a quarter of that. So I'm not going to have to let out as much line. And the reason that, or really I guess 2 reasons that it's important to me is, one, if I have them not as far out back of the boat, 200 feet back or you know, any distance, the closer I got them to the boat and they're being trolled, the tighter I can run a ledge. It's because they're not far as back. Another reason is just simple fact of reeling in fish. You know, the longer that fish is on a hook, the more likely he's going to get off. So if he's only 35 feet back compared to 65 feet back, I'm going to get him in quicker compared to that further distance. So that's another reason why I like using the braid over there. Another thing with crankbaits that I've always used and will always use is line counter reels. They actually on the top portion, and I can probably open this one up. They've got a little clicker up top and it measures exactly how much line you let out to on the pole. Crankbaits, you know, like a Bandit 300, if you only let out say 25 foot of line, it's going to only dive about 8 foot deep. If I let out 65 foot of line, it's going to go down to 10 foot deep. I'm just using these numbers. I don't have that good of a memory on crankbaits, but you get what I'm saying. I can really precisely put these crankbaits into a certain depth. And as I'm beginning fishing for a day, I might start out on my 18 foot poles, you know, running 75 foot out. Then I'm gonna run my 15 foot, you know, 55 foot out. So I can really kind of fine tune by the amount of line I'm letting out by pulling crankbaits. And that's with the line counter reels. Poles, you know, there's a lot of really good poles on the market, and I can honestly say that, of course, I'm a Denali guy, I've been that way for years, but these poles were designed for pulling. They're not designed to single pole with. Now, could you catch fish with them single poling? Yeah. But the technique that I'm familiar with, that I love, pulling crankbaits and long lining, that's why I got to develop the pole with Denali. And I really wanted something that I had that line separation. I went from 9 foot, 12 foot, 15 foot, and then 18 foot. That gave me that 3 foot separation, and that's why I laid them out like I did here. You can kind of see, you know, the separation that you're going to achieve with the depths there. But does anybody get any questions about either one of those techniques yet?
I do. On your crankbaits, do you ever use a snap swivel?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. I was curious, and
Yep.
what size do you use, like a 12?
No, probably about a 10.
10, you like a little bigger
Mhm.
than 12.
I don't like those really tiny swivels,
Right.
but I don't like those giant swivels either. I like a medium swivel. And another thing that a crankbait is, your first time using them is you got to be careful with them. It's probably one of the most dangerous aspects to crappie fishing because they've got 6 hooks compared to 1 hook, a lot of different techniques, and I have seen somebody, get stuck with them, but be careful with crankbaits. And as you're reeling them in, first time using them, I see guys, they think they've got a fish on because they feel that resistance of that crankbait being dug, and they'll reel too fast and it'll jump out of the water. So that's another thing, if you're just beginning to pull crankbaits, watch that sucker because it will jump out of the water. Go ahead.
What size line are you using on the braided line on that?
I really like about 6 pound diameter. And that's going to in turn about 15 pound, 20 pound test on braid. And that's for the simple fact that it's going to dive deep. And I like as small as I can get, but still tough. Because, I think one of the perceptions about crankbaits is you're just out there just trolling. In some lakes, that's what you do. But like on Ross Barnett, where I guide at during the summer, is I'm actually fishing structure along a river channel that's got, stumps and different things that's broken off right, 4 or 5 foot deep, off the bottom. So I'm fishing structure, and I want something that I can pull that $6 back to me because they're high. A question about crankbaits or Lona?
One more,
Yeah.
if you don't mind. I know you were talking about you might long line to 40 degrees. Okay. And you said summer temperatures for the crankbaits. Is there a water temperature range, would you say, yay or nay?
As far as pulling jigs wise, on the question, if you didn't hear in the back, was I started out pulling crankbaits at 40 degrees warmer. When did I start pulling crankbaits? I like really about 85 degrees or warmer for crankbaits.
Okay.
There's some guys that pull them, around 55 and above. My personal experience on the lakes that I guide on is about 85 degrees. And that's going to be about the first week in June. And that's going to be lake to lake kind of deal. But, crankbaits is just a really good way to cover a lot of water. And I'm the fisherman that don't like sitting in one spot all day. If I'm sitting in one spot all day, my batteries are dead and I'm actually stuck out there and somebody come help me. So I like moving around. I like seeing different portions of the lake. And that's one of the main things that it helps out by, learning the lake. By moving so many different areas through the day, you're going to find a whole lot of brush piles to come back and crappie fish on. If that kind of went there or not. Anybody else got any questions about it?
You said you always use braided jigs.
And I don't know and a lot goes back to being consistent. I haven't had a day that I felt like they didn't bite because of a bladed jig. And it goes even back to what I know. If you go out there and you switch up, I don't care if it's a Southern Pro or whoever, each one of these paddle tails or baits are going to run different. That's even why I've got the little variation in the chart. I've always stuck to Bobby Garland, and I've always used like a pony style jig head, with a willow leaf. Because every kind of factor you throw in there, if I just use, say, like a Bobby Garland baby shad, which is a straight tail jig, it's going to swim different than this stroller. It's actually probably going to go deeper because it doesn't have anything to pull it up. So, there's a lot of fine tuning you can do if you want to, or you can keep it like I do, pretty consistent. I use the same style bait every day, and I use bladed jigs every day. I use willow leaf blades every day. Now I might change up, the colors, but I'm not going to change up there because it's just, I know it works. It works for me.
What's your favorite color?
Ooh, jig head or jigs? Yeah, the one that's working. I like orange in Mississippi. I have got to the point that I have seen particular day that you've got every pieces were correct and you can say, all right, I know they wanted that orange head with a purple passion jig. But most of the days, I don't think the jig heads are the biggest factor. I think the jig bodies are a big factor, but I don't really think the jig heads are that much of the factor. Someday, I have had them patterned hard enough that I knew they wanted a white jig head and whatever color it was. But that's very rare I get them that fine tuned because they change up. You know, we've all been out there and the fish stop biting. And you're like, man, what happened here? Well, you probably hadn't changed up fast enough to recognize that they just changed to different colored jigs. But up here is I've actually got some of my favorite colors that Bobby Garland produced. And my favorite color, I hate saying that I have one favorite color.
I was really talking about
Yeah, I'm gonna go into this one too. This is Bluegill Fire. It's made by Bobby Garland. It has caused a lot of crappie death. I mean, it has caused, it's kind of like the COVID of crappie fishing. The next one that's been just burning, smoking hot, it's called Keystone Candy. And you can kind of see if it's a purple chartreuse with a red glitter in it, and that's another serial killer for crappie. Eclipse, it's just a, it looks more blue in this light, blue black, but it's another one of my favorite colors.
You had 12 last year.
Did I really? Did I cut back on myself?
You had a spring.
Oh yeah. I left my laptop. Yeah, you patterned me. This is Grenada Gold. This is a color that I actually come up with that everybody now has this color combination, but I like to take a little credit on this one. This was the first color combination was produced by Bobby Garland, was Grenada Gold, and of course it come from me wanting this color for Grenada, and it is a killer. On Washington too. And I'll talk about colors even a little bit, but this is another one of my favorite colors, and it's called Double Silver Rainbow, and it's just another Purple Passion. I wanted to call it Blue Smurf, but I just thought about Purple Passion, and I guess it kind of took me back to high school or something. Probably headaches. Next one is Bug Chartreuse. This is just a good round crappie killer as well. This is a new color by Bobby Garland, and they've got another color that's similar to it called Horsefly, but this is Mud Dogger, and it's just a little bit more brighter color, orange and chartreuse than the standard, and just a plain old Eclipse, which is a real, just looks like a minnow. As we can see, I like glitter and I like solid baits, and how I'm gonna kind of determine where I'm gonna start out with. Now, I don't live and die by this scenarios in my head. If it's really bright and sunny, I'm gonna pick out some bait that has glitter in it. I want something reflective. If it's a cloudy day, which I think we have outside right now, I'm gonna pick out a body that don't have glitter. Now, is that live and die by? Absolutely not. This is a general rule to start out with. And like I said, I get to fish probably, I don't know how many days a year, but a good bit, and it seems to work. So if that's another tip you might want to hang on to. But any other kind of questions?
You always run strollers.
I live and die by strollers. I love them. I told the guy that used to own Bobby Garland, Chris Lindenberg, years ago, I was like, I believe if you cut me, I might pour bleed out plastic. Do I use a lot of minnows when I guide? No. I come up with a slogan a couple of years ago, Minnow Lives Matter. I think it's kind of catchy. You know, I'm just kind of kind-hearted like that. I don't like killing minnows. One of the things about these plastics is they don't die. I don't have to keep them alive. I can fish with them multiple days without killing them. So I like the ease of using jigs. If I'm using minnows, it's a pretty tough bite. I don't know of a single month that I say, well, no, I'm not going to use plastics. I'm not going to use artificials. I fish artificial bait 97% of the time.
What causes you to go from long line to crankbaits? What's
You know, I feel like lakes have personalities. And might sound a little cheesy, but through the years I feel like these lakes have personalities on colors. And I go like Sardis. I know that's you're a big Sardis man. I feel like Sardis has a personality when it comes to colors. Enid has personality. Lake Washington has personality. Wade has a personality. But all lakes have a kind of a personality on colors, and they change. You know, one year your hottest color might be, you know, orange and chartreuse, and it might be just on fire all summer long, and then next year I go back there and they're wanting June bug chartreuse. But, you know, I would say something, but there's a lot of women here and I don't want to make nobody mad. So they change up.
Hey Brad, what's your thought on the gentleman you had on your podcast that talked about scuba diving and the color?
Oh yeah, George Tolson. I think he's a madman. I think he was obsessed with color. I think he's right.
Well, that's what I'm wondering, because I mean, if you think by him or go by that,
Yep.
you know, how much is it really in the color? Because he basically said the reds were gray and
Right.
the chartreuse turned white.
You know, I don't know what they see.
Kind of weird.
Yeah, it is, and that's what it goes back to personalities on these lakes. I wish I knew, but I feel like they've almost got personalities on what colors they like, and that's why I have every color they make. And that's why when I went to Bobby Garland for years, I'd be like, first thing he would ask me is, what color you want now? And that's why they've got so many colors, because literally I'd bug the living crap out until they made it. It's like, you gotta have it. And I'd be like, we've got 600 different colors, and way to verify they got a bunch.
That's where I thought maybe the body was more important, between the stroller and then you know, you had the baby shad and whatever else, you know, the pointed tail and so on.
Right.
Have you got the swimming pool yet to look see what colors are?
No.
Yeah, George did it a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's just interesting on the podcast when he said he got under the water
Yeah.
to fish and actually looked at them, and chartreuse turned white, and
Right.
you know, so.
You know, and it goes back to me with a lot of lakes have a same color water, but they like totally different colors.
Right.
Why is that?
Right.
I mean, a shad is a shad color no matter what body of water is in. I think it's just a personality thing. Like Darbone, those folks were from down there. I feel like that lake there has a personality of purple. Ross Barnett has a personality of purple.
Yeah, we fished the Ozark.
What personality you got?
You know, and Monkey Milk is, you know, crazy there, and you know, a couple others, but.
It's
Lake Washington. I mean, yeah, Lake Washington. What personality?
2 colors. Bluegill Fire. Keystone Candy. I love them. Like, this is the COVID of Lake Washington. Bluegill Fire. It has murdered them. And that's a little, probably a tasteless joke, but I thought it was funny. Appreciate everybody. Subscribe to Crappie Connection. I know I've got some guys in here that watch us. We've got some really cool things coming. No base is going to be untouched.